He had all the money in the world, but nothing could make his son speak, until a quiet waitress with a picture card stepped into their lives and changed everything. Mason Hartley was known for two things: his brilliant mind in the tech world and his silence about his personal life. Since his wife died during childbirth, he'd retreated into a world of structured schedules and carefully guarded emotion. His 5-year-old son, Leo, had been diagnosed with selective mutism and autism, and remained entirely nonverbal. Mason tried everything money could buy: specialists, technology, therapies, but none could draw Leo out. On a rainy Tuesday, Mason took Leo to a quiet roadside diner in the small town of Winslow, where he'd recently bought property for a retreat. Leo clutched his tablet with picture cards, his only means of communicating. Mason sat across from him, sipping black coffee, eyes flicking toward his phone every few seconds. Silence wrapped around them like a second skin, until a loud crash from the kitchen startled Leo. The boy screamed, plates clattered. Mason's eyes widened, paralyzed by the sudden meltdown, but someone else moved. Grace Marlowe had seen tantrums. She worked the early shift at Millie's diner 6 days a week and had a soft spot for the overlooked. As soon as she saw Leo flailing, knocking over his juice, she slipped into motion. Mason snapped up, about to intercede, his body tense, voice rising. "Don't touch him, he's fine," Mason barked. Grace ignored him. She knelt beside the child and slowly pulled a laminated card from her apron pocket. It showed a smiling son and the words, "I'm okay." She tapped her chest, then pointed at Leo, holding up the card. His frantic sobs slowed. His small hand reached shakily toward the card. Mason watched, dumbfounded. Within minutes, Leo was breathing normally, clinging to the card. Grace smiled gently. "I carry these for my nephew," she said, not looking at Mason. He was furious, embarrassed, but somewhere under that anger, something else stirred. Mason followed Grace to the counter as Leo sat with the picture card still clutched in his hand. "You don't get to touch my son like that," Mason hissed, voice low but shaking. Grace blinked at him, unfazed. "Then maybe you should have done something." The words hit him like a slap. He was used to power, to deference, not defiance from a waitress in a hand-me-down apron. Mason's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "No," Grace replied softly. "I just saw a little boy scared out of his mind and nobody doing a damn thing." Their eyes locked. Something flickered between them. Anger, misunderstanding, and something else Mason couldn't name. He left money on the counter, grabbed Leo, and left without another word. But Grace had already planted a seed in Leo's mind and in Mason's heart. That night, Leo did something Mason had never seen before. He walked into the kitchen, picture card in hand, and tapped Mason's arm. He pointed at the card. "I'm okay." Mason dropped his phone. "Leo," he whispered. His son's eyes, wide and deep, met his own. For the first time, it wasn't just silence between them, it was communication. The card Grace had given him had become a bridge. Mason sat down, stunned. He looked up the diner online. Millie's. He clicked through until he found a photo of the staff. Grace. Her name was Grace. He remembered the way she hadn't flinched under pressure, the calm in her voice, the effect she'd had on Leo. For the first time in years, Mason considered something he'd never imagined, asking for help. The next morning, Mason returned to Millie's diner. Leo clung to his sleeve, the picture card in his small hand already worn around the edges. The place smelled of cinnamon and coffee. Grace stood behind the counter, tying her apron. She noticed them instantly. Her face softened. "I owe you an apology," Mason said. His voice was lower, humbled. "You helped my son yesterday, and I didn't thank you." Grace looked at Leo. "How's he doing?" Mason held out the card. "He used this to tell me he was okay. That's never happened before." Grace knelt again, smiling. "Hey, Leo." The boy didn't look away. He didn't scream. He touched her hand. Mason hesitated, then said, "I want to ask you something unusual. Would you consider spending time with Leo? Help him the way you helped him yesterday. I'll pay you." Grace stood slowly. "I'm not interested in money." Mason blinked. "What then?" She looked toward Leo, then back. "I just want to help him." Grace began visiting the Hartley estate 3 times a week. At first, Mason watched every move she made. Protective, analytical, skeptical. But Grace ignored the grandeur of the mansion and focused on Leo. She brought more picture cards. She taught him how to build small sentences with him. "I want juice." "I need help." "I love Dad." Each phrase was a milestone, each smile a miracle. Mason began to see her through a different lens. Grace had no agenda, no pretense. She was patient, funny, and most importantly, she believed in Leo. It showed in every word, every gesture. One evening, Mason stood at the doorway as Grace and Leo played with flashcards. "You're incredible with him," he said, voice low. Grace turned, wiping her hands on her jeans. "He's incredible. I just help him see it." For the first time in a long while, Mason smiled and meant it. With every visit, Grace's presence seemed to settle something restless in Mason. He found himself making tea for her, asking about her life. She shared stories about her sister, a single mom with a special needs child. She had raised him like a second mother. Mason told her about his late wife, how helpless he felt when Leo was diagnosed, how he'd buried himself in work to numb the pain. They weren't confessions, just moments. One night after Leo had fallen asleep, they sat on the back patio. Stars shimmered above. "Why are you still a waitress?" Mason asked gently. Grace shrugged. "Sometimes people assume because you're good at something, it means you should be somewhere else. But I'm happy helping in small ways. That's what matters to me." Mason looked at her with new respect. Not everyone needed to be rich to be remarkable. 2 months into Grace's visits, a tabloid article surfaced. "Reclusive billionaire's new flame," it read. The photo, grainy, zoomed in, showed Grace walking alongside Mason and Leo outside a bookstore. The next day, paparazzi were camped at Millie's. Grace quit her job on the spot. Not out of shame, but because it threatened the peaceful life she'd built. Mason felt responsible. "I'll fix this," he told her. "You can't," Grace replied, "but it's not your fault." Still, the incident triggered something in him. Doubt. Was Grace staying because of Leo, or something else? Later that week, he overheard a staff member playing a voice memo from an old phone. It was Grace's voice. "He's a billionaire. I'd be crazy not to say yes." Mason's stomach turned cold. The words confirmed his deepest fear. He canceled Grace's next visit. Grace didn't understand. No call, no explanation, just silence. She messaged Mason, nothing. When she showed up at the estate, the gate didn't open. She waited an hour in the rain before leaving. Inside, Mason stared at the voice memo again. But something about it felt off. The tone was playful, the voice clipped. He began to suspect it was edited. Leo grew agitated. He looked for Grace every day. He refused to use his picture cards. At night he cried, holding the one card she gave him on that first day. Mason began to see the damage his decision had caused. He'd torn apart the only stable bond Leo ever had, and it was all based on a lie. Mason had the audio clip analyzed. The verdict, doctored, spliced from different recordings. The full conversation restored told a different story entirely. "She thinks you're a billionaire," someone had teased Grace. "I'd be crazy not to say yes," she'd laughed. Then added, "But I'm not with him for that. I care about Leo." Mason's heart sank. He'd misjudged her. Again, he called her, but she didn't answer. He visited the diner. She was gone. Someone said she moved in with her sister a few towns away. He looked at Leo, who had stopped using his cards altogether. "We need her," he whispered. This time it was Mason who had to find the words. Mason canceled all meetings. For the first time in years, his billion-dollar empire could wait. He drove from town to town, asking anyone who might know where Grace had gone. He brought Leo with him, hoping her name might light something in his eyes. It took 3 days. A woman in a local grocery store recognized Grace's photo. "She's living with her sister, that old blue house past the orchard." Mason knocked on the door with his heart in his throat. Grace answered, wearing an oversized sweater, a tired expression on her face and surprise in her eyes. "Leo hasn't smiled since you left," Mason said softly. "I made a mistake. I believed something I shouldn't have." Grace crossed her arms. "You believed I was after your money." "I believed I didn't deserve your kindness," he replied. She looked down at Leo. His eyes were locked on her. He held up a crumpled card from his pocket. "I miss you." She bent down, tears in her eyes. "I missed you too." They sat in the kitchen over warm tea in silence. Leo leaned against Grace's side, content in a way Mason hadn't seen in weeks. "I had the audio analyzed," Mason finally said. "It was fake, spliced together." Grace didn't react right away. Then softly, "I thought you trusted me." "I didn't trust myself," he said. "And I didn't understand how much I needed you." Grace looked at him. "It wasn't just about Leo anymore, was it?" He shook his head. "It still is, but it's also about you." Grace stared into her cup. "I came into your life for Leo. Everything else just happened." Mason nodded. "Let me earn your trust again, both of you." Grace agreed to return, on one condition. No titles, no money, no press. Just family. They returned to the estate in silence. But it wasn't awkward. It was full of unspoken promises and fresh beginnings. Leo was different too. He started using his cards again. He began humming when Grace entered the room. He even initiated a hug one morning. A milestone no specialist ever predicted. Mason stepped back from his company, appointing a CEO to give him more time at home. He wanted to be present, not just physically, but emotionally. He and Grace didn't define their relationship. It didn't need labels. They were a team now, unified by the boy who'd taught them both how to listen without words. Spring came. Flowers bloomed along the edge of the estate. Life softened around the edges. Grace and Mason began spending quiet evenings together, watching Leo draw, walking the gardens, laughing over old movies. One night Mason caught her looking at an old family photo of his, one with his late wife. "You must think I'm trying to replace her," Grace whispered. He took the photo gently and set it down. "No one replaces anyone, but people heal. And sometimes love finds us twice." Grace's hand reached for his. "I'm not perfect, neither am I," he replied, "but we're good together," and they were. Leo had always communicated in gestures, cards, or hums. But one crisp morning everything changed. They were at the breakfast table. Grace poured orange juice, Mason was flipping pancakes. Leo pointed to the syrup bottle, and then, barely above a whisper, said, "Please." Everything stopped. Grace turned slowly. "Leo?" He looked back, proud but unsure. "Please," he said again. Mason's eyes flooded. Grace knelt beside Leo, hands trembling. "Say it one more time, sweetheart, please," he whispered and smiled. It wasn't just a word, it was a breakthrough, a gate thrown open, and they knew then they were witnessing a miracle. From that day, words came. Slowly, carefully, but steadily. Leo began stringing together phrases he'd memorized from his picture cards. "I want apple. I love Daddy. I love Gracie." Mason couldn't stop smiling. Every word was a treasure, every syllable a victory. They started speech therapy again, but this time Grace joined the sessions. Leo lit up when she entered the room. She had become his safe place, his voice box, and Mason, he began dreaming again. Of things he never thought he'd have, a family, a future, laughter in the hallways instead of silence. But even the strongest bonds face storms. One afternoon, Grace overheard a conversation Mason had with a business partner. The partner referred to her as the hired help who got lucky. Grace said nothing, but it pierced deep. That night she was distant. Mason noticed. "You're pulling away," he said. "I don't want to be a footnote in someone else's story," she replied. "You're not," he said, approaching her. "You're the author of this one." She looked up. "Then tell them that." He did. The next day, Mason resigned from the board. He sold the gossip magazines that had once hounded her. He built a fund in Leo's name and put Grace in charge of it. She didn't need the money, she needed the respect, and Mason gave her both. One golden evening in the backyard where Leo had first spoken, Mason knelt in the grass with Leo by his side. He handed Grace a small box. Inside was a ring made of interlocking vines, delicate and strong, like her. "I can't promise it'll always be easy," Mason said. "But I can promise it will always be real." Leo tugged at her hand. "Say yes," he whispered. Grace dropped to her knees, laughing through tears. "You little conspirators," she said, then looked at Mason. "Yes," the three of them embraced, a family not by blood or fate, but by choice. At the wedding, Leo walked down the aisle holding the ring pillow. The guests gasped when he stopped at the front, turned to the crowd, and said, "My family." Simple, clear, undeniably his. Grace sobbed. Mason froze in awe. It was more than a speech, it was a declaration. Their vows weren't extravagant. They were about breakfast pancakes, therapy sessions, quiet nights, and messy mornings, real things, everyday love, and Leo stood between them, holding both their hands. The estate, once quiet and cold, was filled with music and laughter. Grace's picture cards were now stored in a memory box. Leo kept one on his desk, the sun card. "I'm okay," he no longer needed it, but he liked to remember how far he'd come. Mason started writing again, about parenting, healing, and second chances. Grace opened a community center for neurodivergent kids. Leo ran its ribbon-cutting ceremony with a loud, joyful welcome. This wasn't the life Mason envisioned years ago. It was better. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us what truly matters: love, trust, and the quiet miracles that change our lives.